Airing on Asheville FM 103.3 LPFM in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. Hey patrons. This week we're sharing a recent chat with Devi Machete, an anarchist involved in the Tijuana mutual aid project known as Contra, Viento, Marea, Comedor, which distributes clothing, medical supplies, meals, and packaged food throughout the week near the border with the USA. This project, known in short as El Comedor, is launching a free school and art laboratory in May. For the hour, we talk about the migrant caravan in 2018 that gave rise to El Comedor, the self-organized work around the project, and resisting the dehumanization of the border through solidarity and community. Since the U.S. allowed the Trump-era Title 42 COVID-based restrictions on immigrants entering this country to expire and has moved back to Title 8, there have been some changes in the scenario that Devi will address in an addendum at the end of this episode. You can learn more about the project at their Facebook or Instagram pages, and soon they'll be relaunching their website, which is listed in our show notes.
My name is Devi Machete, and I am a migrant organizer in Tijuana with the collective Contra, Viento y Marea, El Comedor Comunitario. We go by El Comedor in the community, and I've been a migrant organizer for 18 plus years. I use they, them, but any pronoun is fine with me.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about Contra, Viento y Marea, and I wonder if you could translate the name and sort of the meaning behind it and explain what a comedor is and such, just kind of introduction.
Contra, Viento y Marea, the name translates roughly into against all odds or against the wind and tide. Contra, Viento y Marea was the name of the caravan that came to Tijuana from Guatemala, Honduras, y El Salvador. That's where it originated, and it came all the way to the U.S.-Mexico border, the only caravan to do that. And that was it arrived in Tijuana in November of 2018, December of 2019. The name of the caravan, Contra, Viento y Marea, was then the name of a bodega that was near the Benito Juarez Sports Complex. It was a bodega where folks from the caravan lived there. The caravan had about 5,000 migrants, primarily from Central America. And it also had a contingency of LGBTQ plus migrants. When they arrived at the border, a lot of them were living on the streets, in apartments near this area, in the Zona Centro, Zona Norte. Some of them were living in this bodega, and that was also the name of the bodega, Contra, Viento y Marea. The migrants that were living there organized themselves autonomously. They created their own kitchen crew, their own security crew, their own donations crew to accept and give out donations. And so without having any previous organizing experience, the migrants in this bodega organized their living situation as best they could. And they carried with them the legacy of the caravan's resistance. The bodega then welcomed organizers from the U.S., like myself. I came down to Tijuana with a collective called Hecate Society, queer artists, femmes. And we went to live in the bodega at the request of the migrants that were living there. A lot of the migrants were youth. And so it was an interesting dynamic because we were working with a lot of migrant youth. And the bodega was under a lot of repression from the municipal government. I can get into that later on, but to make the long story short, when that bodega was closed down by the municipal government after a long battle, the migrants held their ground for 2 months and used all kinds of successful direct action tactics in order to avoid the forcible eviction. But once they decided that they were going to go to a shelter and relocate and close down the bodega, the migrants that had been organizing the kitchen crew and the others wanted to continue doing their work, wanted to continue serving meals to a lot of migrants, pregnant women, children that were living on the streets that had just arrived with the caravan, and others from the community, like the homeless population here, others with disabilities that live on the streets, and drug users and that kind of thing. And so we managed to collect the resources that we needed in order to open up this space, which is also called Contra, Viento, y Marea. This community kitchen, frontline resource center, it also is very recently become a kitten rescue operation. And we also have a rooftop community garden. In a few months, we're planning to open a free school as well. And it's all under the Contra, Viento, y Marea name. The migrant organizers that were the founders of this space chose that name.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much there in that story. And so the current incarnation and the affiliated projects continue to be autonomous then? They aren't connected to like the church or any NGOs or anything like this?
They continue to be autonomous, yes. There have been times where we've had to have a fiscal sponsor in order to be able to receive certain financial benefits. So there have been times when we have had a fiscal sponsor. At one point, we were sponsored by Switchboard Trainers Network, which is a radical group. We recently got a fiscal sponsorship again from a theater in San Diego that's for the Latino community. It's called Tu y Yo. Yeah, I feel like they are a good partner, but ultimately it's just temporary. We don't plan to stick with them forever. We're looking to continue to find ways to resist autonomously without being in this relationship with a nonprofit, even though it's a very beneficial one for both of us, I'd say. At this time, it's also something that we're doing because we had to think about alternatives for fundraising given the pandemic. And so we started applying to grants, small grants, nothing huge, but in order for us to be able to sustain the project post-pandemic world, we have had to diversify our revenue stream to include some grants. And so, yes, there have been moments like now where we do have a fiscal sponsor, but for the most part, the project out of its 4 years has been completely autonomous.
Yeah, and I think there's no shame. Like I wasn't asking about some like purity reason. Like you're operating under capitalism, so it makes sense that you have to find funding sources. But also, like it sounds like it's important to you all that you keep your independence and like mission and values, and like that I know is like the major fear that I hear people represent when they talk about like fiscal sponsorship or what have you, is that they'll be tied down to not the people that directly benefit from and participate in a project, but down to like where the money's coming from. Yeah.
Those are valid concerns. I definitely understand them from a firsthand point of view. We definitely value being a project that is mutual aid centered and that leaves the decision making into the hands of the volunteers who do the labor. And so at this moment, that's still the case. We did get other offers for other fiscal sponsors where they would be much more hands-on, and we rejected them outright. We've gotten offers from nonprofits that have wanted to literally buy our project out, and we have rejected them even though they have offered us thousands of dollars. Being a mutual aid project that's autonomous comes with a lot of financial penalties. Literally, your donations are not tax-free. Your donors cannot get tax write-offs. You can't get grants. There's a lot of ways in which the government punishes those that are outside of the nonprofit industrial complex. And so to navigate those complexities, we've had to be creative about our strategies for working and the ways that we, in particular, accept or decline donations.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like the carrot side of the carrot and stick. And you mentioned that the municipal like government in Tijuana was trying to shut down the process, the project, or like change the way it operated. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm curious.
That was before we had this space. That was in the first bodega that the migrants had themselves. And there were some organizers like myself and my collective and others from anarchist groups that were inside the warehouse living and supporting the migrants. But when the group of 500 migrants was living in the bodega near the Benito Juarez sports complex, the municipal government tried to shut down that bodega. They used tactics that are from a common playbook that they use against all other migrant camps that pop up along the U.S.-Mexico border. And so those tactics would be, for example, they took away the porta potties that were outside the bodega. They told the trash collectors to stop coming to pick up the trash. And so the trash would pile up on the streets corners, and the neighbors would start to complain that the migrants were leaving a lot of trash. But that was a strategy created by the municipal government to get the community to turn against the bodega and the migrants themselves. Other tactics included not allowing water or food to enter the bodega. They had at the end of the long struggle, like towards the last month, they had a line of riot police standing in front of the entrance of the bodega so that if you stepped a foot out, you couldn't be let back in, even if all your belongings were there and you just showed up one day after work and you were no longer allowed to go in. They create this ID system in which they show up. The municipal government will create this system where folks need to get an ID to be in the camp. And so they'll only come in the middle of the day. And then whoever is there gets their ID taken, their photo taken, and they get the ID, right? But if you're off, for example, going to a doctor's appointment and you're not there, when you try to come back to enter the camp, if you don't have that ID, you can't you can get back in. So they would deny people entry. They put a lot of pressure on the families with children to leave, arguing that the children were unsafe, that it was too dangerous there. And so when the children and the families would leave, they would get much more violent with the people that remained. And so that was a tactic to try to push the families with children out. Other tactics as well. And this is at a time when there is a municipal government run camp that they started called El Barretal that was like 20 kilometers outside of the city and in a rural kind of area. It was very unsafe. They wouldn't distribute any of the donations that they had. People were going without tents, without sleeping bags. They barely distributed any of the food. It was really unsafe. They didn't have adequate bathrooms. They didn't have electricity or had electricity shortages when they had it. It was just a disaster. And so there was about 3,000 migrants living there, and they were constantly leaving because it was so unsafe. And they would lock them in at night so they couldn't leave, and they had barbed wire set up. And so there was a bunch of these tactics that the municipal government used. And this is what they do across other migrant camps that have existed. There was one more recently that happened here at the border crossing El Chaparral, and they did a similar approach to try to vacate that camp. And that camp as well was not run by the government. It was autonomous. So when we were nearing the end of the struggle at the bodega, there was one night where they sent about 200 riot police fully armed to go evict the warehouse. And the migrants locked themselves down in the warehouse. They closed down the entrances and chained themselves to the door and barricaded. The police were humiliated because they were not able to evict the warehouse that night. It was like around 5 a.m. And so the migrants successfully executed direct action tactics to keep themselves from getting evicted, and were very successful at their campaign of direct actions overall. I mean, they used a ton of really creative strategies to bring in water when it was denied, to bring in a birthday cake for someone. And so, yeah, I think these are migrants who have no previous organizing experience. They were able to come together and use a lot of anarchist tactics and strategies very in very impressive ways that I think show that our tactics and strategies are viable in the most extreme situations, and that others who are coming from communities outside of the anarchist community already deploy direct action tactics. And so it's a really beautiful example of seeing how um, migrant resistance, autonomous resistance, is happening despite all the repression, and it works, and it's been effective at combating the state.
Yeah, and it's also like not. I mean, this. I do want to talk about the organizing that you all are doing now, but even just the like collective method of movement, like across those borders, like as I've understood, it's pretty unsafe to be in a territory that you're not familiar with, speaking with a different accent, assuming that you even speak the same language, not necessarily knowing like the rules. And so like transiting as a group, as a caravan seems like a good, not only like way of gaining publicity for the question of people's safety and ability to transit across borders, but also to be able to provide mutual defense in those circumstances. Like that caravan was really impressive, what I saw of it from afar.
Yeah, it was very impressive. And that's why I think it's important to talk about the caravan when we talk about our mutual aid project, because we inherited that grand legacy of autonomous migrant resistance that continues in this project. And so to understand the work we're doing, it's imperative to go back to how we started and how it is that we met. It's a nexus. This project is a nexus between anarchist organizers that were local from Tijuana, from other places in Mexico, from the US, and from other countries, coming together in alliance with migrant youth from Central America. And we started this project together, and we continue to run it together. I don't think there's other projects like ours in this region, but I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, but not that we've come across. And so we feel that we stand out for these reasons in terms of what we represent, and also the ways in which this history informs our current work.
So would you go into a little more detail about like the ins and the outs of the project, like what the programs are that have been running and who participates in it, and and just sort of like the neighborhood that you're situated in?
Sure thing. Let's start with the last part of your question. We're located in the Zona Centro, and then just 2 blocks away from Zona Norte. We are a block away from the border wall. This area is heavily militarized and over-policed. We have the National Guard patrolling the streets with armed assault rifles and other weapons of war. We have the Mexican army patrolling the streets, armed soldiers walking around in patrols. Then there's, of course, the Baja California State Police. There is the municipal police. There's other agencies that span the gamut in terms of being part of the military or other police forces. And so this area feels like an open air prison, or can feel like a war zone. There is an escalating number of homicides, rapes, kidnappings, extortions, disappearances, and everything in between. All of these things happen because we're living in an area that has concentrated the number of migrants that live here in this area, because it's a low income neighborhood. It's very much an impoverished neighborhood. People are living on a few dollars a day, and the cost of living is extremely expensive for the local people. This project serves people that are the most marginalized. We serve migrants, refugees, deportees. We serve folks that are living on the street, the disabled, sex workers. The red light district is a few blocks away. We serve LGBTQ folks from shelters and also that live in this community. We serve street vendors, other types of day workers, construction workers. There's a shelter next door to where we serve. So there's folks from that shelter. We serve outside of a free medical clinic. There's patients from that clinic that come eat with us. The Comedor used to serve here at our space before the pandemic. After the pandemic, we started serving outside of the clinic and Espacio Migrante. We serve outside for safety reasons because we're serving around 200 to 250 people per serving. And so having that many people grouped together during the pandemic was unfeasible. Prior to the pandemic, we were serving around 500 a day. Now we're serving 200, 250 a day. We used to serve lunch and dinner Monday through Saturday. Now we only serve lunch Monday through Thursday. The pandemic has been very challenging in so many ways, but we continue to strive to do the best we can with the resources we have. In addition to the free food program, we have 2 bodegas that we built on the rooftop of the kitchen, and we store donations of clothing, shoes, hygiene products, things like toothpaste, shampoo, soap, towels, sleeping bags, diapers, tents, all the things that people need to live. And that includes medications that are vital, such as Narcan or naloxone. It's a medication that's used to reverse the effects of an overdose from an opioid. And we're struggling with an opioid crisis that is driven by fentanyl in this community. And so we give this medication out for free, no questions asked, in addition to all the other goods and meals that we give out. We also give boxes of food staples with like rice and beans, stuff that we have in sacks. We'll split it up. Whatever veggies we have in the fridge, we'll split it with people and give them boxes for those that have stoves or refrigerators. So we give out hot meals. We give out the boxes of staple goods. We give out clothing and medications and all these things. We also put on events. We have an acupuncture clinic with a group called Acupuncturists Without Borders. We used to do it once a month, but we're preparing to open the free school in this month in a few days. So we have kind of stopped doing them so frequently. Before the pandemic, we had a free medical clinic every other Saturday here at the Comedor. We had doctors from that clinic where we serve now, where we serve meals outside of. They used to not have a space. And so they would go to the shelters and they would come here and their doctors would do the clinics here. But now we send we refer folks to that clinic and then we serve outside of that clinic. So we continue to support each other, but it's a little bit different now. Aside from events, we have a community garden that comes and goes with the seasons and also with the volunteers. The majority of our volunteers are migrants, refugees, deportees. Most of them are youth. And so because migrants don't come to Tijuana to try to live here, they're all seeking to cross to the US. We constantly have volunteers leaving and new volunteers coming in. We also have volunteers that come from the US who are students or who live in the communities nearby or have friends in common with us. And so they come down and hang out and support. And the garden also lives off of that energy, depending on who's around. But we do try to keep a lot of herbs and things like chili peppers, shallots, kale, those things. We used to have a lot of tomatoes, but the heat up here isn't adequate for them, and they require a lot of water. And so we might bring them back during the free school if we're able to build vertical shelves where we can have them stashed up in a way that recycles the water. So we have plans to expand the garden in the free school. Last but not least, we have started rescuing kittens. This was not something we planned, We found a couple kittens on the street that were alone and needed help. They were hungry and cold, and we brought them into the space. And then we had a cat who showed up and started living here in the bodegas. Eventually, she got pregnant and she had kittens. And then, so we have those kittens as well. We love the cats. We feel like they are an important part of our space. They are very supportive of our projects. They bring a lot of joy into our lives. We are trying to give some away as we rescue some. There's others that just come and eat here that live in this neighborhood that are street cats. And so we feed cats as well. We've become a community kitchen for cats. And yeah, last thing I'll mention is that we're opening a free school here at the Comedor May 26th. And this free school is part of our vision to continue the work that we're doing. All the programs that we have grow out of the necessity that the communities that live here have. And so they emerge from the volunteers and from the people we serve. For example, when we opened the community kitchen, people would start asking us, do you have a pair of shoes? I'm going to try to cross the border wall and my shoes have holes in them, or, I can't run in these shoes. And so we would be like, well, let's see if we can start collecting donations then and giving out shoes and giving out backpacks. And so we would put calls out into our networks, and then we would get donations down here. And so we started providing donations that way based on what people were needing and asking us for. And the free school likewise began under that same kind of vision. Our compañeros, migrant youth who volunteer here, wanted to learn different skill sets that they felt we could muster the resources to have. So they would ask, for example, to have classes of English so they could learn to speak English. And so we would do them here and there, whenever we had time, whenever we could organize around to do it, but it wasn't very often and it wasn't systematic. And so the idea emerged that we should have talleres, that we should have workshops for the volunteers. And we began working towards that we were thinking about it actually before the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, we kind of tabled the plans. And then after the pandemic now, the idea has reemerged. And about a year now, we've been organizing to try to open a free school that's not just for the volunteers, but for other folks in the community who haven't had opportunities to get an education or have lacked meaningful educational experiences in the education system that's currently in place. And so we want to start off with a pilot version of the free school that's going to last 2 months from May 26th to Friday, July 21st, I believe. We're hoping to have around 15 to 20 students. We're opening the free school as a different type of educational project. We want to center the students, the volunteers, the teachers or facilitators. We want to center learning and make it enjoyable and use this type of radical pedagogy called PAR, Participatory Action Research. It's also called IAP in Español, Investigación, Acción Participativa. And in this line of radical pedagogy, I can give you a quick example of how it would be implemented.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the role between teacher and student is not one that's vertical, it's horizontal. And so the student can learn from the teacher, yes, but the teacher can also learn from the student, or the student can also participate, for example, as a volunteer in organizing the free school, or the teachers can go to the other workshops and be part of them. All the volunteers, teachers have the opportunity to attend as many of the other workshops as they want. And the students likewise have the ability to teach workshops if they so choose to. All the roles are horizontal and everyone can participate in as many of them as they want based on capacity or interest. We believe that knowledge is produced by those in all kinds of different ways of living. And it's not just something that happens in academia. We also want to see the the talents, abilities, skills that people have in this community be shared widely and for free with others in the community, and not necessarily just siphoned off into academia or the nonprofit sector or for the employment sector. We want knowledge to be liberated from the skill sets that people have in this community, to share them with others in this community, a place for folks to come together and play with paint or learn about Zen meditation or Aikido, learn about harm reduction, come read Latin American poetry, all kinds of different skill sets that people are volunteering to teach. And so what we want is to create a school that is about the pleasure of learning and building community with each other, building care webs where folks will meet others who live in this neighborhood. And then from there, they can have a friendship that will allow them to have a person in their life who they can call in times of crises or when they want to go get coffee, and enrich the quality of life that's possible by just bringing people together and having the space and resources for folks to share what they love and for others to learn about those things, and also contribute to a space that values community, that values organizing on a basis of friendship and not for monetary exchange.
I was going to say that's really impressive, and thank you for teaching those things, like, to me, like that really, like you say, I think that really like fills out the possibility of like building longer term relationships with the community that is more stationary, that like has lived in the neighborhood for a while and that's not like passing through after a period of time. That seems really important, like just out of comradeship, as well as for building these sort of relationships among the folks that use the resources and partake in it. And yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. Also, I'm glad the cats are getting fed.
Yeah, there's a lot more to the free school, but we can talk about any aspect of the work, and then if we want to touch on the free school, I can go into more detail, or we can talk about it in a little bit.
Well, how about would you talk a little bit about the art lab, and then I'd like to hear more about the free school for sure.
Yeah, the art lab is an essential part of the free school. The free school we're calling Escuela Libre y Laboratorio de Arte, and the initials are ella, which in Spanish is the word for her. And the art lab is a place for students to come decompress, heal trauma, play, enjoy each other's company, and learn new skill sets that could be a new potential source of revenue if necessary. And so as part of the art lab, we have several workshops that we're doing. One is a digital photography workshop. We have another that is murals, where folks will learn about, in particular, a little bit of the history of public art and how murals are part of a continuum of radical art, and look at maybe some examples of some famous muralists from the third world. In Mexico, there's a rich legacy of muralists, like the most famous probably being Diego Rivera, but there's also many, many others. Alfredo Siqueiros is another big one. And their artwork reflected communist themes, but also just popular revolutionary themes depicting the indigenous side of Mexico and many other, the laborers, and just a lot of the other struggles. And then folks will learn about how to paint a mural and then actually paint one at the space. Then aside from this mural course that we're doing, we also have a couple of art therapy workshops and art workshops. The art therapy workshops will come from this collective in Mexico City called Huesos de Obsidiana. And they do art workshops all over the world. They've done some in sub-Saharan Africa. They've done some in Europe. Yeah, and so we also are getting a tattoo gun, and we're going to have an intro to tattoo art workshop. We have a makeup and body art workshop that's also part of the art lab. So yeah, these are a bunch of different ones. We have Zumba classes. We have Aikido, which is a martial art form that comes from Japan, and it's meant to harmonize the body and purify the body. That's the type of ritual that it intends to do. There's a lot of really great ones. And I feel the point of having the art lab is to have the time and space carved out for folks to engage in their creative abilities, to process trauma, to build up self-esteem, to help them have an outlet for emotions, and being able to channel those emotions into something creative and productive and not something destructive is really healthy. And the art lab also helps folks create things that could lead them to, for example, get a job as a photographer for a newspaper, or get hired by other community groups that need folks to come do photography at their events or whatever. It could be like a gig, or it could be like a full-time job eventually. So we want to give people skill sets also that could lead them to have a different life, one that's less exploitative and more creative and beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. I took Aikido for a bunch of years, and like, if nothing else, like the fact that there's a lot of like self-defense stuff in there in terms of using someone else's body weight to get them away from you, or disarm someone, or what have you. So, I mean, useful for meditative purposes as well as to some degree for self-defense.
Yeah, the Aikido workshop is going to be taught in conjunction with the Zen meditation workshop. It's the same workshop teacher, and he wanted to teach both of them together. So
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Are you tired of listening to Western experts talking how the world works?
Isn't it a portion of liberal analysis of the uprising makes you fall asleep?
Well, then check Elephant in the Room, an anarchist radio show from European Dresden, where we interview activists who are participating in struggles around the world.
Elephant in the Room is a proud member of Channel Zero Network. You can find our show on your favorite podcast platforms, CZN website, or somewhere on the internet.
From activists
For activists.
The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the other shows on the station. You name this dynamic where there's like people that are there for a longer term, and then there's the folks that are coming through and, using the resources and engaging in these projects, and hopefully will be engaging with like the school when it starts up, and who are planning on moving through, and who don't necessarily consider the area home, but also this being an opportunity for like engaging local folks in the community too.
Yeah, we have folks that are coming in that are migrants and youth, refugees that we imagine are going to either move to another border city to attempt to cross somewhere else. A handful, very few, will actually get asylum legally through the U.S. Others will get asylum in Mexico and might decide to move elsewhere in the territory. Others will return home if they can't get asylum and they see that they don't have any support here, no family, no friends, no resources, no income stream that's reliable. And so some folks that can will, very few too, will go back home, but others will try in different border cities to cross, or border towns. And then we have, the school is also for those that are locally here, though. We want folks that are from this community who might get overlooked because they're not migrants, and there's a lot more resources coming in to support migrants. We want youth that might not have access to educational opportunities because of their immigration status, because of their poverty, because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, or their race, being indigenous or Black, or those kinds of things as well. So we want to give opportunities for folks that live here and might not have any formal education. Some of the students might not know how to read or write. The idea is to give folks information, tools, skills that are valuable for their well-being, not just mentally, but physically, spiritually, in all aspects, so that folks can have a much more dignified and meaningful life.
So I think what I was going to ask is like, how does this institution or a series of interlocking like projects that offer services and goods differ from charity? How does it become mutual aid? Is it because the people that are coming through are like helping to shape the curriculums and like participating in the operation of it as well as benefiting from it, or how do you all view that? And is that an important distinction that you feel like is talked about a lot there?
It's a huge distinction, and it's very important. And I'll tell you why. As a mutual aid collective, we, the volunteers, make the decisions about how we operate. We decide what programs and projects to do in conjunction with the community that we serve, which we're also a part of. And so we don't have an executive director. We don't have a board of trustees telling us how we have to, operate or what we have to do. We make decisions on a consensus basis. Sometimes that's just, having meetings where we just talk informally. Whoever is around will come together. We need to make a decision, and we'll just talk about it, and then we make a decision. And so it doesn't require waiting for someone's permission who isn't here, who maybe doesn't have their ear to the ground, who doesn't know this community. The folks that are doing the work and are part of this community know best what needs to be done. And so we have the flexibility to adapt our programs as we see fit to better serve the community. And it doesn't require, a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that other organizations that are top heavy might have to engage in. And that includes the ways that we decide on how we spend our funds, right? We decide together, like, if we need a stove or if we need to compensate people or whatever, like we just make those decisions collectively. And so that's one distinction. Another distinction, I guess, that's related to that is that because we rely on small donors and small donations, we don't have just one foundation giving us all the resources. And so if that foundation were to decide that we're not doing what they like, or we're too radical, or their donors feel unhappy with anything that we're doing and they decide to pull the funding, that wouldn't be the end of our collective. We have managed to bring in enough revenue from various sources so that if one source fails, we can still continue with the others until we find another way forward. And what that effectively does in us having no one major donor is that we don't have to cater to the whims of the elite who give donation. We, the volunteers, decide. We're guided by the community, not by the donors. Another way that we stand out as a mutual aid project versus a charity or part of the nonprofit industrial complex is that the way that we do the work, right, because we are volunteer-led, is so that we are able to value the process by which we work in a different way. So the people that we're serving are not just numbers. The measure of success for us isn't how many plates do we serve. And then if we served a lot, then that means we're more successful than if we serve less. That's not how we measure our effectiveness. We measure it by how do we treat each other? How well do we do supporting the community? Whereas, it's more about the quality of what we're doing and not the metrics game, because our grants require us to have a benchmark of how much we do. Therefore, we then have to cater to them. It's more grounded in what we are capable of doing and feeling good in the work we're doing. And so in turn, it allows us to give dignity to the people we serve. Because when you start looking at people as numbers and start considering, migrants as how many beds did we fill in our shelter as the benchmark of success, then it leads for people to easily become dehumanized. It leads for people to forget that you're working with real human beings that are complex and have a wide range of needs. And so I think being a mutual aid group allows us to have a little bit more dignity in the work we're doing as volunteers, but also in the ways we serve. So those are some distinctions. There's more, but I think you get kind of the gist.
Yeah. No, that's well put. You've mentioned the location of, being a block away from the border and the militarization and the fact that people have been who have been in the legacy of this project, including currently, have been transiting north to get across yet another border. I was wondering well, I'll just read the thing that I wrote and we can go from there. So the U.S. control of the border has been militarizing and closing off other corridors for transit to the north since the 1990s, although obviously there's prior existence of border patrols and different like laws in the United States allowing for passage of people for periods of time or for specific purposes. But this sort of thing is like accelerated since 9/11. The AMLO administration, like past Mexican presidents, has been increasingly militarizing the northern and southern borders of Mexico to, among other things, appease the gringos. I'm sure alongside a number of other reasons. Meanwhile, I imagine like anywhere, it could be quite dangerous for people making the trek north to live in, as I said, like a strange land and without the roots that they may have had at home. Can you talk a bit about the border, the role it plays in the life of the folks around Contra, Viento, y Marea, and the role of mutual aid in that?
The way that it impacts the volunteers, being that a lot of them are migrants, is that they traverse, some of them coming from Central America, like 3,000 miles to get here, only to have their dreams dashed when they get to Tijuana and realize they're not able to get asylum, and their options for finding an alternative route to get across require thousands of dollars, and the risk that you'll be kidnapped and extortioned or disappeared or murdered outright. And so it's a challenge doing this kind of work in the border of U.S. and Mexico. AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the current president of Mexico, has softened his rhetoric in terms of the way he speaks about migrants, but in reality, he's a continuation of the previous administration's hard line towards migrants. AMLO has agreed to invest $1 billion in the northern and southern borders of Mexico, so the border with Guatemala and the border with the U.S. He created the National Guard, which is used as another military establishment in which they patrol the streets, and they're used against migrants to target them for arrest and deportation. Yeah, they're vicious. They do seem to be concentrated in the northern region and the southern region, but there's also some across the border. They've put in checkpoints all across the major highways and roads in Mexico so that there are migration checkpoints that you have to cross to get into the major cities. It's a huge issue because migrants then avoid the cities where they could get free food or healthcare or support in any other way. But because the checkpoints, they have to find other ways, more dangerous routes to get into the cities if they so choose. They can't travel on buses. They have to train hop, which is extremely dangerous. And also migration officers will chase and follow and arrest people on the trains. A lot of folks ride on the tops of the trains, on the sides of the trains, or on the bottom hanging on, which is extremely dangerous. A lot of folks die that way. Yeah, some folks will travel on the Mack trucks. They're called rastras. And so in order to move from city to cities, a lot of migrants walk for hundreds of miles. They'll, have to hitch rides on the rastras or on the trains, and all of it is just a gamut of dangers. And it's very unfortunate that migrants have to face these conditions simply because the governments of Mexico and the U.S. and the other governments further south, like in Guatemala and in Central America, they all are working in tandem at the request of the U.S. to suppress migrant caravans and migrants and refugees from being able to travel north. The country of Mexico has become a border wall in and of itself, and it has spread throughout the entire country. And it's not just migrants coming from Central America and places like Haiti, which there are a lot of Haitians here, but also from Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, Brazil, Cuba, as far away as Russia or Cameroon. And so there's a lot of migrants from Jamaica, from all over the world that are here looking to get to the other side. And they've come through increasingly dangerous routes. I think there's also a lot of Mexicans that are internally displaced from states like Michoacan and Guerrero that are coming to the border now because the cartel violence is so strong in those states. They're literally like active war zones. And so the shelters here in Tijuana are full of Mexican internally displaced refugees, in addition to migrants from other from Central America and such. But our volunteers come from these populations, and so they have experienced all of these different terrible situations and from firsthand understand what it's like to need a hot plate of food, to need a sleeping bag, to need a good pair of shoes and a backpack. And so that's why our services and the way that we provide care for people is so close knit to what the community needs, because our volunteers needed these things and now they are providing them to others. And so from firsthand experience, they know what it's like to not have these types of supports systems and these things that are necessary for folks to live and survive. And so the way that we do work is much more in line with what the community is facing and needs. A lot of folks come to the free food program and they like the food and they like the atmosphere, and then they'll start volunteering shortly after. They'll help serve, they'll come cook, help wash the van on Sundays, help take out the trash, whatever. And so that's how we recruit our volunteers, from folks that come to our free programs, free community programs. They'll then like what they see and then they'll start volunteering. And so we have very much close ties with this community in Zona Norte, and the border is a huge part of this zona. Another friend of our collective says that the border is a business, and even some of the shelters are invested in that business because they're getting grants off of the migrants that they serve, and literally not investing any resources in community building. They'll let migrants come and stay for a few weeks or a month, and then they kick them out, and that's it. Like, they don't care if they have somewhere to go, or if they are going to be living on the street, or if they need anything else. Like, they literally just churn them out after they stay there, and have no concerns for helping them in other ways. And I think that's part of it, that the border is a business that makes a lot of money for folks throughout the chain, and that includes those that provide humanitarian aid. Some of these big charities and organizations are making a lot of money off of the migrant crisis, and so they're not invested in changing the conditions migrants are being forced to flee. And our projects, our collective, is invested in challenging the border as a business. We're not trying to preserve the structure by which migrants are being forcibly displaced. We are trying to actively combat it. And so even though we might be doing similar humanitarian work, the vision behind our work is much different than other projects per se.
Yeah, that actually leads me to the next question I was going to ask. I mean, it seems like the building of the community and the sharing of resources that you're doing, I'm sure it saves lives, and it enriches people's lives and builds relationships, and that in and of itself is important. But like, when I think about the border from this side, like, luck of the draw or roll of the dice or whatever, I was born on this side of the border, and haven't had to escape the situations that a lot of the people that are traversing these like very dangerous routes are trying to get away from. And when I think about the border being on this side of it, like, I don't know really what ways that I can actively be in solidarity in a way that actually challenges the border itself. It's such a huge, like, as you say, business, but it's a military exclusion zone between multiple states where, like, there's instances every few years where U.S. Border Patrol shoots across the border and kills someone on the Mexican side, and there's no sort of accountability for that sort of thing. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we can, as anarchists, as autonomists, as people who believe in freedom of movement, can think about opposing the border and undermining it.
That's a great question, and a very timely one at that. I think all of us are capable of being in solidarity with migrants and refugees, whether they're those that are living in our cities and towns who are our neighbors and are undocumented, or are documented but need support in other ways. We can help them there. We don't necessarily need to come to the border to find migrants to help. There are migrants living all across the U.S. that need help with rent and help with accessing healthcare, accessing childcare, accessing all kinds of services. And so that's one way to plug in. But then there's also the ability for us to support collectives and groups that are anarchists that are doing humanitarian aid or are supporting migrants through collectives on the ground. And we constantly need donations of food if you're near the border, and clothing and those kinds of things, or if you have a connect to condoms or Plan B or whatever it is that you can like send to us so that we can distribute them in the community. Like the case with Narcan, we have a collective on the other side that supports us with Narcan. And so that's how we have access to it for free and give out for free here in the community. And there's a lot of ways for folks to plug in besides donating money and goods. I mean, you can come down and support as a volunteer for as long as you need or want or can. And if folks aren't physically able to come to the border, there's ways for folks to be in solidarity by providing commissary to folks that are in detention centers or supporting those that are inside detention centers as well. I think if we were to talk about the landscape of the migrant justice movement, there's at least these three areas, and they do overlap, right? They're not distinct categories. So there's the pre-detention, detention, and then post-detention / deportation. And we're on the pre-detention side. We get to work with migrants that are not yet in detention, that are on the Mexican side of the border, that need all kinds of support, right? They've just traveled thousands of miles and they get to these cities without anything. Sometimes they need medical care. They need access to lawyers. They need access to housing. They need all kinds of things, food. And so material goods. And so we fill that void, and the work we're doing is in the pre-detention side. But then there are folks who have crossed over, have been caught by Border Patrol, and they're now in detention. And so we'll meet folks that we knew here, and then now they're in detention, and we'll pass over the names of those folks to those in the U.S., in those states where they're located, in order for them to track them and help them while in detention. And then folks will get deported, and then there will be a need for folks to help them, because a lot of them come back. They don't just stay back home, especially if their lives are in danger. They'll attempt to cross again. And so there's a substantial amount of migrants that are continuously coming back from being deported and attempting to recross over and over and over again. And so there's a need for folks to help those that are facing deportation hearings, to have accompaniment in court, to help translate documents for them. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that people can plug in, and you can be really creative in the ways that you operate. And it doesn't require you to do something new if you're necessarily not feeling that direction. So if you're an artist, for example, you can make your art and sell it, and then some of the revenue you can donate to groups that do migrant support. Or if you are a photographer and you want to come down and do an expose on migrants and like show the resistance of migrants, to contrast all the negative stereotypes and depictions of death that exist about refugees and migrants in the media. You could do that. You know, it can be in whatever you're already doing. You can just find a way to plug in your work into being in solidarity with migrants and refugees and those of us that are organizing migrants and supporting the community.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a doctor, you can come be a volunteer here. If you know how to make like recycled clothes, like fashion designer or something, you can come down and do that with our donations of clothing and make some of them that we wouldn't otherwise give out like usable. And so there's a million ways that people can plug in with what they're already doing. It doesn't require you to create a whole new skill set. But of course, if you are feeling adventurous and you'd like to come down and you have access to a passport or want to try to get a passport, we would definitely support those volunteers that need to get passports with that, so that they could come down and hang out and visit and also learn about what it is that migrants are facing. I think it's important to listen to them and really leave the U.S., because anarchists need to leave the U.S. to see what other struggles are like outside. And I think it's very important and eye-opening. We get to be immersed in all these different struggles that people have been fighting and learn from their strategies and tactics, and that way enrich our own movements back in the US, but also enrich theirs in these other countries. Yeah, Tijuana, you get to meet all kinds of people from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds. And it's a very diverse city. It's one of the busiest border crossings in the world, if not the busiest border crossing in the world. And a part of it is that a lot of the people that we talk to on a regular basis have terrible stories of tragedy that they're facing and are going all kinds of duress. And it's very common to find out that people are living these incredible nightmares, and we are making a concerted effort to create in this project to create the utopia that we deserve to live in, that we are trying to create a mutual aid economy in which we all get everything we need to live for free. And it doesn't matter what your immigration status is or where you come from. Nobody should be denied hot food, and not waiting for the revolution to come or not waiting for the state to collapse. But in this project, if it is only, this project that does this, we are going to do the best we can to create a world in which we all live with dignity and have the things we need at our fingertips. And so we know we're not alone, and we work in solidarity with many other groups and people and collectives that do adjacent and complementary work, or that do things that are, different movements of justice, but we support and stand firmly behind. And so all of us together are trying to build this new world in which all the things that are missing from this one in this dark dystopia of a capitalist hellscape, that we're building this world here for ourselves and for our community. And of course, we're not immune from any of the violence and outside pressures, and we're in competition with the nonprofits and all that in terms of just being able to survive in this landscape. But we are here in order to prove that there is a future in which anarchists and migrants can collaborate to bring about the world that we need, a world that's possible and within our fingertips. And so we are doing the work of revolutionaries. We are the revolution. We're living the revolution ourselves. And instead of waiting for it to come to our doorstep, all our projects are aligned with that goal, with making the world a better place for everybody, regardless of their background, regardless if they're sober, regardless if they're a good or bad person or migrant. We don't fall into those tropes. We believe everybody has a lot of complexity in their lives, and also that some things that people do to survive are not something they're proud of, and people have to do things that they don't want to do in order to survive. And sometimes we have to do decisions that are rational based on our own self-preservation, and we understand that doesn't define who we are. That we can also learn from experiences that we have and be better people. And I think the project itself is a representation of the world in which we want to live, and imagining that world and then creating it for ourselves.
I want to ask where people can learn more and how they can make donations. But first I wanted to ask, just because it's in the back of my head, because of the way that, because A, you have mentioned that there's increasing violence in the area, in the neighborhood, and B, because of the perception north of the border of what Mexico's like. How do you think people who would be interested in going but are a little concerned about safety, what are some good ways to approach that concern?
Well, I think, yes, it is. The border is a dangerous area, of course. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But I think there are other places in the U.S. that are also very unsafe. I don't know, there's places in downtown L.A. that are unsafe. There's places in neighborhoods that are rough, that are starved economically on purpose to make people desperate. And poverty is intentional. Poverty is created on purpose to exploit people, to control them. And so, yeah, this area where we are, there are high levels of crime and all kinds of horrendous things happen, right? There's mass graves that are found here. There's like 30 mass graves that they found just in 2022 here in Tijuana and in Baja California. There is extreme cases of mutilation and decapitations of migrants. A few blocks from here, there was a migrant from El Salvador that was decapitated. So we've seen people murdered on the street. One time we were going to the grocery store to get stuff on our way to our serving, and there was a man lying on the parking lot floor on the ground who had just been killed as we pulled up like a few seconds before. And so we're constantly surrounded by the violence. We're not immune to it, but those things are here, yes, but we keep each other safe. We take care of each other. We look out for one another. We do all kinds of things to ensure that we're safe, and we do the best we can, right? But I think it's about the community that you're with, right? And for us, everyone who comes volunteer with us, we make sure that they're good. I mean, we do take all kinds of precautionary measures. We do have very rigorous security culture protocols that are in place. And yes, I think the risks are there, but also the rewards. You get to bond with people that have so much incredible talent and are inspirational in their bravery. And you get to immerse yourself in a different way of being and seeing the world that ultimately will allow you to grow and understand from firsthand experience why it is that migrants are leaving and coming to the US. And it has a lot to do with US imperialism. It has a lot to do with the US invading countries in Latin America and arming right-wing death squads and overthrowing democratically elected presidents and installing puppet military dictators. I mean, these are the reasons why Latin America is fucked. It's not because the US has just played some like non-interventionist role. And so I think it requires folks in the US to wake up to that our own government is responsible for the migrant crisis, that our own government is responsible for the cartels, that we were responsible for deporting the gangs into Central America that are now controlling parts of the country, and those things come from the US. And so it's incumbent upon us to wake up to those realities and take actions to mitigate the harm that our government has caused, actively so, and show that we are part of the movement for migrant justice, that we are here in solidarity, not to be part of their exploitation through the business of the border, not to do poverty tours, but to actually mitigate the harm that has been actively caused by our government, not just in the past, but continues to do so. And there is hope for the future in that we are all able to come together in alliances and work together towards a common cause across all sectors, across all different types of groups and movements, that we find common cause and we support each other. And through that transnational solidarity, we can begin to bring about the structural changes that we need for there to be a future for all of us. Climate change has put a timer on our ability to organize and has made it so that there are going to be many more climate refugees coming in the coming years. If we don't figure out strategies by which to embrace migrants and support them, this crisis is only going to grow in its mortality. And as anarchists, I think that we share a lot of the same values that migrants and refugees share. They don't trust the state. They wouldn't call the authorities for support. They are willing to risk everything for their dreams, willing to hop trains, ride bikes, walk in caravans, traverse borders, confront the full force of the state. And I think migrants are the ultimate anarchists in a lot of ways. And we share the same values and the same perspectives. And so I think it makes it so that it's a very natural alliance, a very organic alliance to work together in solidarity.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So how can listeners, you mentioned giving support, possibly showing up where you're at, but like how can people in the listening audience learn more about the Comedor and the free school and how to plug in or how to send donations?
Yeah, we're getting ready to revamp our website. So our website might not be up right now. The volunteer that was doing it for the last 4 years is stepping down. And so we're currently working on that. But our website is Contra, Viento, Marea, TJ.com. It should be up within the next week or so. And then we have a Facebook, Contra, Viento, Marea, Comedor. And then the Instagram is Contra, Viento, Marea, el Comedor, something like that. And so those two pages, we upload photos of our servings and things like that, flyers, announcements, things like that. And then folks can contact us through DMs, through the Facebook or Instagram page. We also have an email, contravientoymariacomedor@gmail. And then we have a email for the free school, escuelalibrettijuana@gmail. We have a Venmo where folks can donate funds for either the Comedor in general or for one of our projects. It can be for the community garden, it can be for the free school, it can be for the community kitchen. And so our Venmo is at TJ Refugee-Support. We have a GoFundMe page that is linked to our website. It's also has the name of the Comedor in it. And so, yeah, folks can find us on their mass surveillance platform of choice. I think we just started a TikTok as well, but we haven't fully promoted it. We just uploaded some videos to it that we finished. And so we'll have that out soon. Yeah. And I think if people want to learn, they can reach out to us and we can talk. And I think that's the best way to engage. What we want is for folks who are interested in whatever ways they want to plug in and having conversations and learning from each other and finding ways to organize on a basis of friendship. I think that's the most important. We're not here for you to come and just come do wash dishes and then leave. That's not what we're about. We're about hanging out, talking to each other, sharing great food. Yeah. Also giving out great food and making our work mean something, not just in terms of productivity goals, but making it mean something for us as volunteers, as friends. And so, we welcome folks who are interested in supporting in any ways they want to. If you have access to a certain kind of resource, we welcome that. If folks are interested in driving down donations or interested in coming and volunteering, we can support in all the ways that are required so that you can be here with us and feel good and feel safe and feel embraced.
Awesome. Thank you, Devi. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, and your project sounds amazing. Are you all going to be featured in the Elements of Mutual Aid series too?
Yeah, we are.
Awesome. Okay. I saw that there was at the beginning of one of the recent previews before I spoke to the directors, I saw that there was a project in Tijuana, and so I wasn't sure if that was y'all or someone else. That's exciting.
Yeah, we're featured in the documentary. We love Leah and Peyton. They're awesome. They came down and hanged out with us for a little bit, so it was really fun, and we're looking forward to the film. Yeah,
I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, and your project sounds amazing.
Devi Machete, Contra Viento y Marea, el Comedor Comunitario, Tijuana, Mexico, May 17th, 2023. Statement about the end of Title 42. I wanted to briefly touch on the news lately getting a lot of attention regarding a surge of migrants coming to the U.S.-Mexico border to seek asylum now that the anti-migrant policy, Title 42, has been effectively lifted. Title 42 was a public health care protocol that was passed under the guise of fighting the spread of COVID-19 under the Trump administration. It was put into effect in March of 2020 and has been lifted now in May 11th. The effects of Title 42 have been to mass deport almost 3 million migrants who would otherwise be asylum seekers that could have legitimate claims processed in any other time. The way in which Title 42 played out is that it effectively eviscerated the legal pathway to seek asylum at a port of entry along the border. Many migrants who came in previous years have been waiting for Title 42 to be lifted in order to seek asylum. And there have also been some newcomers that have recently arrived from their home countries who are also making their way to present themselves to Border Patrol to be able to start their asylum claim. What is true is that there is not a surge of migrants coming right now to seek asylum. And instead, what we know from being on the ground and seeing how the trends of migrants over time have played out is that there has been an increase, yes, in the number of migrants coming to the U.S. border overall, but that has been a gradual trend over time. And so this is nothing new or out of the ordinary, what we're seeing right now. It's part of a continuum of migrants coming to the border in greater numbers because of climate change, because of political instability and violence associated with the gangs or the cartels. One of the things that is important to mention is that there's a group of about 100 plus migrants who are waiting to be processed by Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, who are being kept in between the two border walls and have been in makeshift camps there for about, some of them for a week, some of them for a few days. And while they're waiting for CBP to process them, they don't have access to water, food, medical care, medicines, all of the basic necessities. The reason why Border Patrol is taking longer to process them isn't because there's been an exponential increase in the number of folks waiting who are now presenting themselves. It's more based on the image of people waiting fits into this broader narrative that there are more people coming here. And in Tijuana, that has not been the case. What we know is that in Ciudad Juarez, there have been more people arriving and also presenting themselves after having been waiting for the past 3 years along the region, waiting for Title 42 to be lifted. And so they're now just starting to claim asylum. And what we also know is that the migrants who are there are folks who didn't decide to come to the U.S. border because they wanted to take advantage of Title 42 being lifted or any other reason related to U.S. policies. The reason that people are coming and seeking asylum is due to the conditions that are happening in their home countries. And these policies do not serve as a deterrence. They only make the journeys more harrowing and dangerous. They further empower organized crime because migrants who don't have a pathway legally to seek asylum will turn to human smugglers who are part of the network of drug cartels, and they make money from crossing migrants over. And so they've been able to reap huge profits from Title 42. And this empowerment of the organized crime groups has led to increasingly violent outcomes. So we are seeing more kidnappings, more extortions, more disappearances, rapes, robberies, homicides, all of the gamut of human rights violations imaginable. The migrants that are coming to seek asylum are reporting that their journey north has been much more dangerous than in previous years, that it is increasingly becoming more hostile and impossible, not to mention that when they arrive, they are received by Border Patrol in the most inhumane ways possible. And what we are doing here at Contra, Viento, Marea to support migrants is providing them free hot meals, providing them access to the resources we have, clothing, medicines, everything that we offer to the public. And we will continue to do so, but we also feel it is our duty to report what we are seeing on the ground. As migrant organizers and migrants ourselves who are part of this mutual aid project, we believe that policies like Title 42 will never serve to deter migrants. They will only create situations where more migrants are killed, disappeared. And so we stand against Title 42 and other policies like it. The Biden administration has announced that Title 42 will be replaced with Title 8 and with additional anti-migrant rules. Title 8 is a policy that will allow asylum seekers to present their claims of asylum when they turn themselves into Border Patrol, but they will be kept in detention centers. And so this policy, Title 8, will further criminalize migrants, forcing them to be in detention centers for longer periods of time. And that in turn makes profits for the private prison industry that is also operating these migrant detention centers along the border and elsewhere in the country. What we know from what's been happening with migrants who are attempting to cross is that the wave of deportations that began under Title 42, that was expedited deportations, is going to continue under Title 8. People who are allowed to present asylum claims are very quickly expelled from the country if they don't have certain documentation, if their asylum claims cannot be verified. There's a whole gamut of reasons why people are excluded from being able to present their asylum cases effectively. And so we expect the record number of deportations to continue. It's been extremely difficult seeing the ways in which Title 8 is part of this broader push to criminalize migrants, further militarize the border, and overall increase the number of migrant deaths that happen. And we are firmly against Title 8 and these new Biden rules that, for example, say migrants have to seek asylum in countries along the route. So that would be Mexico in most cases. And if they do not do that and present themselves to Border Patrol without having first gotten asylum in Mexico, for example, they will be deported. The other way in which these new rules are going to continue to lead to mass deportations and death is that migrants are now required to seek asylum using an app called CBP-1 that is riddled with technical errors and makes it so the majority of migrants cannot navigate or use the app effectively to claim asylum. The purpose of the app is to deter migrants from being able to even apply for asylum, which is the same intended effect of Title 42. And so we're not seeing a shift for the better in terms of this new announcement with the Title 8 and the new immigration rules that have just been announced to replace Title 42. We know that there are infinitely better ways to treat migrants with dignity, and this is not what we're seeing at the moment. But we wanted to be very clear that we are going to continue to see the numbers of migrants coming to seek asylum rise as it has been for the past 2 decades. What we know is that at the root of the problem is that migrants are not able to live in their home countries because there are all these increasing different factors that are forcing them to leave in order to save their lives or their children's lives. It's imperative for the migrant justice movement as a whole to work on building networks of solidarity across the different migration route points in order to better support the migrants and to adapt to the new realities of the migration crisis that will inevitably continue to escalate as the factors that drive migrants from their homes are not mitigated. We are hopeful that there can be changes that come through organized resistance, and we are very proud to be part of those efforts.
And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
I've come to realize something about myself. I have a real visceral contempt for intellectuals. I can't stand them. Can't be around them. Can't pretend to like them. Now, I'm not talking about smart people. I don't hate anybody just because they're smart. I'm talking strictly about intellectuals. Somebody called me an intellectual once. In an interview, I had to quickly correct them. I tried to be polite about it at any rate. I said, I'm a writer. Writer's right. I don't know what the fuck an intellectual does. He laughed. I made it less awkward by throwing the F-bomb in there. When in doubt, drop an F-bomb. But I digress. Intellectuals. Socialists seem really enamored with intellectuals. They've got intellectuals pouring out of their ears. They're everywhere. I'm not sure what a socialist intellectual actually does, but I think being an intellectual is an excuse for not chopping your own firewood or mowing your grass or doing your own shopping. Shit like that is beneath an intellectual. In that regard, socialist intellectuals are a lot like my dude Atom Bomb, who smokes a bong and plays World of Warcraft all day. He has an ogre mage who really kicks ass. Yeah, so if you're ever playing World of Warcraft and you encounter an ogre mage run by username AssMaster5000, tell him he has a lot in common with socialist intellectuals before he smacks you with a ray of disintegration. Anarchists don't have many intellectuals. There's Noam Chomsky, of course, but I have to be careful what I say about Chomsky. A while back, I said he was a dusty fart bag whose big dumb books were useless for anything but tossing in front of Israeli tanks to stop the bulldozing of Palestinian homes. And somebody who sounded suspiciously like Chomsky called the radio show and threatened to rattle my teeth loose if I didn't keep his bleeping name out of my bleeping mouth. Yeah, sometimes F-bombs don't make things less awkward. Bookchin might be an intellectual. I'm not sure. I can't understand a word he's ever written. Even when he tries to explain what he's already written, I get more confused. So I don't know if he's an intellectual. I'll need somebody to explain Bookchin to me before I can potentially hate him. And so here's the problem I have with intellectuals. I have my own experience of life. It's valid to me. And you have your experience of life, and it's valid to you. No one's experience is any more real or significant than anyone else's. Except intellectuals, it seems. Intellectuals are the arbiters of meaning and validity. It's their role to explain to all of us the significance of our own experiences, to string them all together and show us what it really means. Intellectuals rule in the life of the mind. I don't know that I need their contribution in illuminating to me the meaning of my life. I think I'd rather see them get off their lazy asses and change out the bong water, or make a bed, or pick up their dirty socks from underneath the couch. We've somehow gotten hoodwinked into thinking we need this class of mental circle jerkers, that we can't confront the structures of power and oppression without them. Truth is, I've never seen any of their theories tip over a cop car. Now, in all fairness, I have occasionally been blamed for being incredibly sectarian. Some people seem to think that I oversimplify things and present the world in black and white rather than in shades of gray. I've been told that my response, a can of gasoline and a book of matches, can't be the solution to every social problem. And you know what? Maybe, sometimes, a small fraction of their criticism of me might be partly true, perhaps. A little. But even so, I'm pretty sure, even given my biases and intolerance for unnecessary theoretical navel-gazing and useless philosophical ponderings, intellectuals pretty much suck. Did you know Antonio Gramsci actually theorized that there are 3 distinct categories of intellectuals? Yeah. That means intellectuals are even intellectualizing about intellectuals. If that's not masturbation, I don't know what is. Your experience is valid. So is mine. We have common needs, common interests, a common enemy. We both have the tools to understand the meaning of our lives and our world, the forces that confront us, the structures we must topple, and we know what will accomplish that. No theory is going to stop the permafrost from melting. No conceptual framework will save the overfished oceans. For all you can say about my sectarian oversimplifications, a trained chimpanzee with a can of gasoline and a book of matches, deployed in the right place, can do more than all the intellectuals in human history to change the world. Primates rule, intellectuals drool. No, wait. Intellectuals existentially ponder a better selection of words than drool to rhyme with rule. Still waiting. Still waiting. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the super duper uber mega ultra hyper turbo multi maxi max in Youngstown, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can still write Sean at his new old new again address at Sean Swain number A243205 OSP Youngstown 878 Coatesville Hubbard Road, Youngstown, Ohio 44505. You can find his past writings, updates on his case, hear his past audio, find out how to get his books, plus ways to contribute to his legal defense fund at seanswain.org.
This is The Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 610 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm Books is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
Solo voy con mi pena, sola va mi condena. Correré mi destino para burlar la ley. Perdido en el corazón de la grande Babilón. Me dicen el clandestino por no llevar papel. Pa' una ciudad del norte yo me fui a trabajar. Mi vida la dejé entre Ceuta y Gibraltar. Soy una raya en el mar, fantasma en la ciudad. Mi vida va prohibida, dice la autoridad. Solo voy con mi pena, sola va mi condena. Correré mi destino por no llevar papel. Perdido en el corazón de la grande Babilón. Me dicen el clandestino, yo soy el quebra ley. Mano negra clandestina, peruano clandestino, africano clandestino, marihuana ilegal. Solo voy con mi pena, sola va mi condena. Correré mi destino para burlar la ley. Perdido en el corazón de la grande Babilón. Me dicen el clandestino por no llevar papel. Argelino clandestino, nigeriano clandestino, boliviano clandestino, mano negra ilegal.
شوف الله يخليك إذا ما تسالي إذا ما تدوز الصبح شوف داك السماح من الشمال ديال الكرفان ولا شي ناس يمشيو لموريتانيا ويجي معاهم باش الكازين راه غادي يعطيو واحد هذا